Have you ever poured your heart into creating something beautiful only to have someone you love reduce it to nothing with just a few careless words? That's what happened to me at my own anniversary dinner last spring, a night that was supposed to celebrate love, but instead revealed its true absence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had that perfect golden quality. You know the kind that makes everything look like it belongs in a movie? Soft lights reflecting off wine glasses, quiet laughter rippling across the table, the smell of expensive food mingling with perfume and aftershave. I'd spent weeks planning our 15th anniversary celebration at Riverside Grill, the restaurant where David proposed to me all those years ago. I'm Rachel Mitchell, mother of an incredible 16-year-old daughter named Emma, wife to David for 15 years, though that title feels different now than it did just 6 months ago. I've lived in Cincinnati most of my adult life, built my career here, made a home here, planted roots so deep I never imagined they could be shaken. That night, I wore a dark blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Something about turning 42 made me want to prove I still had it, whatever it was. The dress hugged curves I'd worked hard to maintain despite years of stress and late nights building my business. David barely noticed when I came downstairs, but Emma whistled and said, "Mom, you're going to outshine everyone in that restaurant." I'd reserved the private dining room overlooking the river. 8 people, our closest friends and family. David's brother Mark and his wife, my sister Kate, my best friend Jenny and her husband, David's mother Patricia, and of course Emma. I'd insisted Emma join us even though David thought anniversary dinners weren't for teenagers. But Emma wasn't just any teenager, and I wanted her there to see what partnership looked like after 15 years. At least, that's what I thought she would see. The evening started beautifully. I'd arranged for the chef to recreate the meal. We'd had the night David proposed, seared scallops with a champagne butter sauce. I'd organized a playlist of songs that marked milestones in our relationship. I'd even created custom menus with our wedding photo printed at the top, the date embossed in gold. Details matter to me. They always have. "You've outdone yourself, Rachel," Jenny said, squeezing my hand under the table. "This is magical." I smiled, grateful for the recognition, but mostly just happy everything was going according to plan. David seemed pleased too, in his distracted way. He'd been checking his phone throughout the appetizer, but I'd grown used to that over the years. His sales job kept him constantly connected, and I'd learned to accept that his attention would always be divided. "A toast," said Mark, raising his glass after the entrees had been cleared. "To my brother and his beautiful wife. 15 years is no small feat these days." Everyone raised their glasses. Emma beamed at me from across the table. She looked so grown up in the dress we'd picked out together, her dark hair swept up in a style that made her look eerily like me at her age. "Speech," called Jenny, looking at David expectantly. David cleared his throat and stood, straightening his tie. I gazed up at him. This man I'd built a life with. His hair had more silver than when we'd met, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but he was still handsome in the way that had made my heart race when I was 27. 15 years, he said, looking around the table rather than at me. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Laughter rippled around the table. I smiled, waiting for the warm words, the acknowledgement of our journey together, the appreciation I'd been hoping for. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he continued. "Family means everything, and having you all here makes this special." He paused, taking a sip of his whiskey. "And to Rachel." I looked up at him, heart open, ready to receive whatever sentiment he'd prepared. "Well," he said with a small laugh that somehow felt cold, "I suppose I should thank you for planning this evening." You've always been good at spending money on appearances." The air in the room changed instantly. Someone, I think it was my sister, inhaled sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, keeping my voice light, giving him the chance to turn this into a joke. But David didn't take the escape route I'd offered. Instead, he looked directly at me for perhaps the first time that evening and said, "It means exactly what I said. You're excellent at making things look good on the surface, at spending the money I work so hard to earn." I felt my face grow hot. "David, I don't think this is— No, let's be honest with our closest friends and family," he interrupted, gesturing around the table. 15 years of marriage, and what exactly would you say your contribution has been, Rachel? Besides, spending and decorating? The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint music from the main dining room, the distant clink of glasses, but at our table, no one moved, no one breathed. "My contribution?" I repeated, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Yes," David said, now fully committed to whatever this was. "I'm the one who's carried this family financially from day one. I'm the one who leaves the house every morning to actually work while you play with your little online jewelry shop and teach that one community college class. Let's not pretend otherwise." I felt as though I'd been slapped. 15 years reduced to nothing in front of the people who mattered most to me. My hands began to tremble slightly, and I placed them flat on the table to steady them. Patricia, David's mother, gave a small nod of agreement. She'd never quite approved of me, had always made subtle remarks about women who don't properly support their husbands. Mark looked uncomfortable but silent. My sister Kate's face had turned to stone, her eyes flashing with anger she was clearly struggling to contain. But it was Emma who moved first, my brilliant, observant daughter, who suddenly stood up from her chair, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Dad," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "What are you talking about?" David waved his hand dismissively. "Adult conversation, Emma. Sit down." "No," Emma said, reaching for her small purse. "I don't think I will." The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. Emma had never openly defied her father before, at least not like this, not in front of others. She pulled out her phone and a small notebook. "I was going to save this for later, when we got home," she said. "I've been working on something for my AP Economics project, about household economics and gender disparities in perceived financial contribution." David frowned. "Emma, this isn't the time." "Actually, Dad, I think it's exactly the time," Emma replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Mom agreed to let me analyze our family finances for my project, as a real-world case study." I felt my breath catch. I had indeed given Emma access to our accounts, our financial documents, our tax returns from the past 5 years. She'd been working on this project for months, and I'd been so proud of her thorough approach. But I hadn't anticipated this moment, hadn't imagined her research would become part of this very public humiliation. "I've been compiling the data for the past 3 months," Emma continued, tapping on her phone screen. "And I think everyone at this table might be interested in the actual numbers, since Dad seems to have some misconceptions." David's face changed instantly. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by something harder to read. Concern, perhaps. Or anger. "Emma, put that away. Now." But Emma didn't stop. She looked around the table and then back at her father. "Dad, you make $112,000 a year as a sales manager. That's really good. But Mom—" She turned to look at me with eyes that suddenly seemed years older than 16. Mom's combined income from her college teaching, her online jewelry business, and her Etsy consulting services averaged $9,700 over the past 3 years. I heard Patricia gasp. David's face had gone from flushed to pale. "But that's not the most interesting part," Emma continued, swiping to a new screen on her phone. Mom's business has grown by an average of 32% each year for the past 5 years. Last year, her jewelry line alone brought in $68,000, and her teaching adds another $38,000. Her consulting business that she started just 2 years ago already generates $23,000 annually. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. And this doesn't include the inheritance she received from Grandma Rose 3 years ago, which, by the way, paid for 80% of our home renovation last year. The renovation that you've been taking credit for with your golf buddies, Dad. The silence at the table was deafening. David slowly sank back into his chair. But wait, Emma said, not finished yet. Let me show you the most fascinating part of my research. She turned her phone toward the table and displayed a pie chart. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This shows the percentage contribution to our household expenses over the past 5 years. Mom's portion has increased from 42% to 58% since 2020, while yours has decreased proportionally. She looked directly at her father. So, when you say, you've carried this family financially from day one, what exactly are you basing that on? Because the data shows something completely different. The air in the room felt electric. Jenny was staring at Emma with her mouth slightly open. Kate had tears in her eyes. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear. And me? I felt something breaking inside, not my heart, which had been cracking slowly for years with each dismissive comment and financial lie, but a wall. A wall I had built to protect myself from the truth of my marriage, from the reality that the man I had chosen to spend my life with didn't see me, had never really seen me. David finally spoke, his voice tight and controlled. Emma, you don't understand adult finances. Your mother and I will discuss this privately later. There's nothing to discuss, I said, finding my voice at last. It came out stronger than I expected. She's right. Every word. I looked at my daughter with a mixture of pride and sadness that she had to be the one to speak this truth. I've been downplaying my success for years because you always seemed so threatened by it. I thought if I just kept quiet, kept the peace, you'd eventually see me as an equal partner, but you never did. I stood up, legs shaking but mind suddenly clear. And I can't do it anymore. Not with Emma watching. Not with her learning that this is what partnership looks like. I turned to our guests, these people who had witnessed not just our anniversary, but now the unraveling of the fiction our marriage had become. I'm sorry about dinner. The dessert is still coming. It's a recreation of our wedding cake. Please stay and enjoy it. I need some air. I walked around the table to Emma and squeezed her shoulder. Thank you, I whispered. She reached up and covered my hand with hers. Mom, she said softly, I've got the Uber app open. Just say the word. I nodded, tears threatening, but not falling. Give me 5 minutes. As I stepped outside onto the restaurant's riverfront terrace, the cool April air hit my face like a relief. The Cincinnati skyline glittered across the water, lights reflecting in rippling patterns. I took a deep breath, then another, feeling something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, but clarity. The door opened behind me and I turned, expecting Emma. Instead, it was Kate, my sister, her face tight with concern. Rachel, she said, stepping closer. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? I shook my head, watching the boats on the river. Tell you what? That my husband thinks I'm worthless? That I've been pretending my business isn't succeeding to protect his ego? That would have made for some fun sister lunches. Kate put her arm around me. You're the furthest thing from worthless. Your jewelry is in 3 major department stores. You've been featured in fashion magazines. You're changing women's lives with your mentoring program. How can he not see that? Because he doesn't want to, I said simply. He needs to believe he's the provider, the successful one. My success threatens the story he tells himself. Kate was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I turned to look at her, suddenly certain. I'm going to leave this restaurant with my daughter. I'm going to go home and pack some things. And tomorrow, I'm going to call a lawyer. You can stay with me, Kate offered immediately. I shook my head. No, I'm not leaving my house. I've paid for most of it, designed every inch of it, built my studio there. He can leave. Kate nodded, understanding. Emma is incredible. You know that? She stood up there like some kind of financial detective, breaking it all down. Where did she learn to be so brave? I smiled for the first time since dinner began. From watching me build something from nothing, from seeing me work while the world was still dark, from hearing me negotiate with suppliers and stand up to difficult clients. She learned it by watching, even when I thought she wasn't. The door opened again, and this time it was Emma, holding both our coats and my purse. The Uber's 3 minutes away, she said. I told everyone you weren't feeling well. What did your father say? I asked. Emma shrugged. He's trying to explain to Grandma Patricia that my research methodology was flawed, but I footnoted everything and can cite my sources. She gave a small, sad smile. He can't argue with the bank statements, Mom. I printed them all. I put my arm around her shoulders, this young woman who had somehow grown up while I was busy trying to make a failed marriage work. Let's go home. As we walked through the parking lot toward the street, I heard my name being called. David was jogging after us, his face flushed. Rachel, wait, he said. You're overreacting. We can talk about this at home. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just emptiness where love had once lived. There's nothing to talk about, I said quietly. Emma didn't make up those numbers. They're real. What's also real is that you stood in front of our family and friends and tried to humiliate me, to erase everything I've built. I won't let you do that anymore. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. One comment, and you're ready to throw away 15 years? It wasn't one comment, I replied. It was 15 years of comments. 15 years of subtle put-downs and dismissals. 15 years of me making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I'm done. Our Uber pulled up to the curb, its headlights illuminating David's confused face. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd lost something valuable, but couldn't quite remember how it had slipped through his fingers. Mom, Emma said softly, opening the car door. Let's go. I nodded and stepped toward the car without looking back. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of David standing alone in the parking lot, watching us leave. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The house was quiet when we arrived home. Emma and I moved through the rooms, turning on lights, bringing warmth back into spaces that suddenly felt different. Lighter somehow, as if a heaviness had been lifted. Are you okay? Emma asked as she sat cross-legged on my bed, watching me pack an overnight bag. Not because I was leaving, but because I wanted to be prepared if things got difficult when David returned. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I think I will be. Emma nodded. Your contribution matters, Mom. It always has. I stopped folding clothes and sat beside her on the bed. When did you get so wise? She shrugged. Probably around the same time I started watching you build your business from our dining room table. When you stayed up until 2 a.m. filling holiday orders but still made it to my science fair the next morning. When you taught me that work you love isn't measured in dollars, but in purpose. I hugged her tight, overwhelmed by this child who saw me so clearly when my own husband couldn't. I'm sorry you had to be the one to speak up tonight. I'm not, she said firmly. I've been compiling those numbers for weeks, trying to figure out how to show Dad what I saw so plainly. Tonight just gave me the perfect opportunity. We heard the garage door open downstairs. David was home. Emma squeezed my hand. "Do you want me to stay?" I shook my head. "Go to your room. Put on your headphones. This isn't your conversation to have." She nodded and slipped out, passing David in the hallway without a word. I heard her bedroom door close as David appeared in our bedroom doorway. He looked deflated, his tie loosened, hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through. "You embarrassed me tonight," he said, his voice low. I laughed, not unkindly but in genuine disbelief. "I embarrassed you? You publicly dismissed 15 years of my work, my contribution to our family, and I embarrassed you." Emma had no right to air our financial details in front of everyone, he insisted. Emma had every right to correct a false narrative about her mother, I countered. She was defending me when you should have been celebrating me. David paced the room, agitated. This is blown completely out of proportion, so I made one comment. It wasn't one comment, I interrupted, my voice rising despite my resolve to stay calm. It was the latest in a pattern that goes back years. You've been taking credit for my success while simultaneously dismissing it. Do you have any idea how painful that is? He stopped pacing and looked at me. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in years. "I didn't know your business was doing so well," he said quietly. "Yes, you did," I replied. "I've told you. I've shown you the numbers, the growth projections. You chose not to hear it because it didn't fit the story you wanted to believe. That you're the provider, the successful one, and I'm just playing at having a career." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I agreed. "It's not fair that I've had to hide my success to protect your ego. It's not fair that our daughter had to be the one to speak the truth neither of us would say. It's not fair that 15 years into this marriage, you still don't see me." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken truths finally laid bare between us. "What happens now?" David finally asked. I looked around the room, at the photographs of happier times, at the life we'd built, at the cracks that had been there all along that I'd chosen not to see. "Now," I said quietly, "we tell the truth. To ourselves, to each other, to Emma. The truth that this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. The truth that we've both been living a story that isn't real." "I don't want a divorce," he said. But the words sounded hollow, reflexive, rather than heartfelt. "I don't know what I want yet," I replied honestly. "But I know I can't go back to pretending. I won't diminish myself anymore, not even for you." David nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. Not acceptance, not yet, but awareness that something fundamental had shifted. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," he said, standing up. I nodded, relieved and sad all at once. As he gathered some things and left the room, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace washing over me. The worst had happened. My marriage had been exposed as a facade in front of everyone I loved, and yet I was still standing, still breathing, still whole. I changed out of my beautiful blue dress and hung it carefully in the closet. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again make myself smaller to make someone else feel bigger. My daughter was watching, learning, becoming, and what she deserved to see was her mother standing tall in her truth, regardless of the cost. In the quiet of that night, as I lay awake listening to the sounds of the house settling, I realized something else too. The numbers Emma had presented weren't just figures on a spreadsheet. They were proof of something I had built with my own hands, my own mind, my own determination. They were evidence of my worth, not just financially, but as a human being with dreams and ambitions and the grit to make them real. No one could take that away from me. Not David. not anyone. And as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made a promise to myself. From this day forward, I would never again hide my light. My success wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something to celebrate. And someday, I would find someone who wanted to celebrate it with me. But for now, this moment of truth, painful as it was, felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. The first step toward a life where I could be fully, unapologetically myself. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, practical considerations, life-altering decisions. But tonight, in this moment between what was and what would be, I allowed myself to feel something unexpected. Hope. Because sometimes the most powerful truth you can tell is the one you finally admit to yourself. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I woke up before my alarm. The house was quiet, suspended in that strange stillness that follows after everything has changed. I laid there watching dust particles dance in the sunbeam coming through the curtains, feeling oddly peaceful despite the chaos of the night before. I heard David moving around in the guest room down the hall, the soft opening and closing of drawers, the shower running. We'd lived parallel lives under the same roof for so long that the sounds were familiar, yet distant, like a radio playing. In another room, it struck me that perhaps we'd been living as strangers for years, just going through the motions of intimacy without the substance. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. Kate had texted, "Checking in. You okay?" Followed by another. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen Emma do. And you too. I smiled, typing back, "We're okay. Taking it 1 hour at a time." When I finally got up, I found Emma already in the kitchen, making coffee and toast. She looked up when I entered, her eyes searching my face. "How'd you sleep?" she asked, sliding a mug toward me. "Surprisingly well," I answered truthfully. "You?" she shrugged. "On and off. I kept thinking about everyone's faces when I pulled out those charts." I leaned against the counter. "Any regrets?" Emma considered this, spreading peanut butter methodically across her toast. "No," she finally said. "He shouldn't have said that about you. Not ever, but especially not there." I nodded, sipping the coffee she'd made exactly how I liked it, strong with just a touch of cream. "What made you put all those numbers together in the first place? Before last night, I mean." Emma sat down at the kitchen island, tucking one leg beneath her. "Remember when we went to Aunt Kate's for dinner last month? Dad was telling Uncle Jim about the new deck, acting like he designed it and paid for it himself." I nodded, remembering. David had indeed taken full credit for the backyard renovation I'd overseen and largely funded from my jewelry business profits. "I saw your face," Emma continued. "You didn't say anything, but I could tell it hurt you." Then I started noticing it everywhere. How he'd talk about supporting the family and carrying the financial burden when you were literally sitting there having just come from your studio or the college. She took a bite of toast, chewing thoughtfully. "So I got curious about the actual numbers. I figured if I was going to do an economics project anyway, I might as well use real data. You'd always been open with me about money, so..." "So you became a financial detective," I finished for her, feeling a surge of pride beneath my sadness. "I didn't plan to ambush Dad," she said quietly. "I was going to show him privately, but when he said that thing about you just spending his money..." She shook her head. Something just snapped. I reached across the island and squeezed her hand. "You stood up for the truth. I'm not mad about that." The sound of footsteps on the stairs ended our conversation. David appeared in the doorway, dressed for work in a crisp button-down and slacks, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He looked like any other Tuesday, as if the foundation of our family hadn't cracked wide open less than 12 hours ago. "Morning," he said stiffly, his eyes darting between Emma and me. Emma mumbled something inaudible and slid off her stool. "I need to finish getting ready for school." She disappeared upstairs, leaving David and me alone in the kitchen. He moved to the coffee pot, pouring himself a cup. "I have meetings all day, but I thought we could talk tonight." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "I'll be here." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with 15 years of unspoken words. Finally, he asked, "Are you going to your studio today?" The question surprised me. David rarely asked about my work schedule, rarely showed interest in the business I'd built from scratch. "Yes," I said. "I have orders to fill and a meeting with that boutique from Chicago." He nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "The one that wants to carry your statement pieces?" I blinked, genuinely shocked that he remembered this detail I'd mentioned weeks ago over dinner. "Yes, that's the one." David stood awkwardly for a moment, then glanced at his watch. "I should go. Don't want to hit traffic." As he headed for the garage door, he paused, turning back. "Rachel," he said, his voice softer than before. "I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" I asked. "That your business was doing so well, that you were contributing so much." His eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. I guess I never really looked at the numbers. The admission hung in the air between us, an acknowledgement of his willful blindness, but not quite an apology. "No," I said quietly. "You never did." After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, trying to process this strange new reality where my financial contributions were suddenly visible to my husband. It felt surreal that after all this time, after all my efforts to share my successes with him, it had taken our teenage daughter creating pie charts and spreadsheets for him to see what had been in front of him all along. I drove Emma to school, the morning unusually quiet between us. As she grabbed her backpack from the back seat, she hesitated. "Mom," she said, "are you and Dad getting divorced?" The question caught me off guard, though it shouldn't have. Emma had always been perceptive, always 3 steps ahead in understanding the undercurrents of adult relationships. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But whatever happens, it's not because of last night. Last night just brought some truths to the surface that have been there for a long time." She nodded, absorbing this. "For what it's worth, I think you deserve someone who sees how amazing you are, without needing a PowerPoint presentation to prove it." I laughed despite myself, marveling at this wise young woman who had somehow emerged from the chaos of our imperfect family. "I love you. You know that?" "I know," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek before hopping out. "Good luck with the Chicago people." My jewelry studio was a converted garden shed at the back of our property. David had initially dismissed it as my hobby hut when I'd first proposed converting it 5 years ago. Now, it was the heart of a business that generated nearly 6 figures annually, a fact that had apparently escaped his notice despite our shared tax returns. The space was my sanctuary, skylights flooding the room with natural light, work tables organized with the precision of someone who knows exactly where each tool belongs, walls covered in sketches and inspiration boards. This was where I created the handcrafted jewelry that had slowly built a devoted following, first locally, then nationally, as boutiques began carrying my designs. I spent the morning finishing a custom commission, a sterling silver pendant with intricate wirework surrounding a piece of Lake Michigan beach glass, before preparing for my video call with Lakeside Collective, the Chicago boutique interested in an exclusive collection. The meeting went better than I could have hoped. The buyer loved my concept for a limited edition line inspired by Great Lakes topography. We discussed pricing, production timeline, marketing. They wanted exclusivity for 3 months before I could offer the pieces through my website or other retailers. "Your work is exactly what our customers have been asking for," the buyer said. "That perfect balance of artistic and wearable. When can you send the contract over?" 2 years ago, I would have hesitated, would have said I needed to discuss it with my husband. Today, I heard myself say confidently, "I'll have it to you by end of day tomorrow." After the call ended, I sat back in my chair, a strange exhilaration filling my chest. This moment of professional victory felt different somehow, untainted by the need to downplay it, to make it smaller so as not to overshadow David's successes. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to fully feel the pride of what I'd built. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Jenny, my best friend who'd witnessed the anniversary dinner implosion. "I've been waiting a respectable amount of time to call," she said when I answered. "Are you okay? That was intense." I moved to the small love seat in the corner of my studio, kicking off my shoes. I'm still processing, to be honest. "I bet," Jenny said. "Listen, Tom and I didn't know what to do. We wanted to support you, but everything happened so fast. And then you left." "It's okay," I assured her. "There wasn't really a protocol for that situation." She laughed softly. "No, there really wasn't. Emma was incredible, though. Where did she learn to put together financial analysis like that?" "AP economics and a lifetime of watching her mother run a business," I said, feeling that same surge of pride. "She's been working on this project for weeks. I gave her access to our accounts for educational purposes. Never imagined she'd end up presenting it at an anniversary dinner." "Rachel," Jenny said, her voice turning serious, "I need to apologize to you." "For what?" "For not seeing it either. All these years I've listened to David talk about being the provider, about supporting your artistic endeavors like they were some cute little hobby. And I never questioned it. I should have known better." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just David who had bought into the narrative. It was our entire social circle. I had allowed my success to be minimized so consistently that even my closest friends had accepted the fiction as fact. "It's not your fault," I said finally. I played along with it too. I stopped correcting him years ago when he would introduce me as my wife, the jewelry hobbyist, because it was easier than dealing with his insecurity. "What are you going to do now?" Jenny asked. I looked around my studio at the tangible evidence of what I'd built despite the constant diminishment. "I don't know yet, but I know I can't go back to pretending I'm less than I am." After finishing up in the studio, I found myself driving aimlessly, not ready to return home. I ended up at Winton Woods Park, a place I used to take Emma when she was little. I walked along the lake shore, watching a family of ducks glide across the water's surface, thinking about the strange path that had led me here. I'd met David when I was 26, fresh out of grad school with an MFA and dreams of creating art that mattered. He was 31, established in his sales career, confident in a way that I found both intimidating and attractive. He seemed so certain about everything: where to eat, what movie to see, how to invest money. That certainty had been a comfort to me then, a framework I could nestle my more creative, spontaneous nature into. When did his confidence transform into something less attractive? When did his certainty about everything become a dismissal of my contributions, my ideas, my worth? It hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow erosion, so gradual I barely noticed it happening. I remembered the early days of my jewelry business, working from our dining room table after Emma went to bed. David had been supportive then, in his way. "It's good for you to have a creative outlet," he'd said, as if my art was a form of therapy rather than work. When I made my first sale to a local boutique, he'd congratulated me but added, "Don't worry about the money, though. I've got us covered." At what point had I stopped correcting him? When had I started accepting his narrative about our family, our finances, our roles? Perhaps when Emma was in elementary school and I was trying to balance motherhood with building my business. Perhaps when he'd gotten that big promotion and his ego seemed too fragile to handle the news that my hobby had started generating significant income. Perhaps I'd just gotten tired of fighting for recognition and decided peace was worth more than truth. But Emma hadn't been tired. Emma had seen the discrepancy between the story her father told and the reality she observed, and she'd had the courage to speak up. Not out of malice, but out of a fundamental belief that truth mattered. That I mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Heading home soon. Pick up dinner?" Such a normal message, as if nothing had changed. I stared at it for a long moment before typing back, "Already have plans with Emma. Leftovers in fridge." It was a small act of independence, but it felt significant. I wasn't dropping everything to accommodate his schedule. I wasn't putting his needs first by default. Instead, I was driving to Emma's favorite Thai restaurant to pick up takeout for a mother-daughter dinner. When I got home, Emma was sprawled on the living room couch with her calculus textbook. She looked up when I entered, her face breaking, into a smile at the sight of the familiar takeout bags. "Pad see you?" she asked hopefully. "And spring rolls," I confirmed, setting the bags on the coffee table. I thought we deserved a treat. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the normality of the moment a balm after the previous night's drama. Finally, Emma set down her fork and looked at me seriously. "I got some texts from Grandma Patricia today," she said. I tensed. David's mother had never been my biggest supporter. "What did she say?" Emma reached for her phone, scrolling through messages. She said she was deeply concerned about the disrespect shown at the dinner and that finances are complex and not appropriate for children to analyze. I felt a flash of anger. "Did she upset you?" Emma shrugged. "Not really. I just told her that if she wanted to discuss my statistical analysis methods, I'd be happy to walk her through my data collection and validation processes." A small, mischievous smile played at her lips. She didn't respond to that. I couldn't help but laugh. "You are something else, you know that?" "I get it from my mom," she said simply, returning to her pad CU. We heard the garage door open, signaling David's arrival home. Emma and I exchanged glances, both tensing slightly. A moment later, he appeared in the living room doorway, looking tired and somehow smaller than usual. "Thai food?" he asked, eyeing our takeout containers. "We saved you some," Emma said, gesturing to an unopened container on the coffee table. A peace offering of sorts. David hesitated, then sat in the armchair across from us. An awkward silence descended as he opened the container and picked up a plastic fork. "How was school?" he finally asked Emma. "Fine," she said. "We got our econ projects assigned to presentation groups. I'm going next week." David nodded, pushing rice around his container. "The project with our finances?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Yes, but don't worry. I've anonymized all the data for the presentation. No one will know it's our family specifically." He seemed to relax slightly at this. "That's good. And, how was your meeting?" he asked, turning to me. "With the Chicago people?" I was surprised again by his apparent interest. "It went well. They want an exclusive collection for the summer season." "That's great," he said, and for once he sounded genuinely pleased. "Congratulations." The air between us felt charged with unspoken words, with 15 years of history and one night of painful truth. Emma, ever perceptive, finished her food and stood up. "I should finish my calc homework," she said. "Thanks for dinner, Mom." After she left, David and I sat in awkward silence for several long moments. Finally, he set down his food container and looked at me directly. "I've been thinking all day about what happened last night," he began. "About what Emma showed us." I waited, curious where this was going. I pulled up our bank statements today. Our investment accounts. Our tax returns from the last 5 years. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of agitation I recognized from countless arguments. She was right, about all of it. Yes, I said simply. She was. Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked. When I would talk about supporting the family, about carrying the financial burden, why didn't you correct me? I considered this question carefully, wanting to be honest rather than accusatory. I tried at first, but you always seemed threatened by my success. Like if I was doing well, it somehow diminished your role. After a while, it was easier to just let you believe what you wanted to believe. He flinched slightly at my words, but didn't deny them. I always thought of your jewelry as a hobby that made some extra cash. I never realized that it had become a legitimate business, that I was teaching 2 classes at the community college, that I was consulting for other artists. I shook my head. David, I've told you these things. I've shown you purchase orders, talked about expanding, discussed my business plan. You just never really listened. He was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. I think I didn't want to hear it, he finally admitted. I liked being the provider. It made me feel necessary. The raw honesty of his statement caught me off guard. For all our years together, David had rarely shown this kind of vulnerability, this willingness to examine his own motivations. You know, I said carefully, my success doesn't make you unnecessary. It just means we could have been partners, truly equal partners, if you'd been able to see me that way. He nodded slowly. I can see that now. I just don't know if it's too late. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Was it too late? Had too much damage been done? I honestly didn't know. I need time, I said finally. Last night wasn't just about finances. It was about years of feeling invisible, of having my contributions dismissed. That doesn't heal overnight. I understand, he said, and for once, I believed he might actually be trying to. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for last night, but for all of it. I nodded, accepting his apology without promising forgiveness. Thank you for saying that. After David went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room, reflecting on our conversation. His acknowledgement of the truth was a start, but I wasn't naive enough to think one moment of reckoning could undo years of damage. People don't change their fundamental worldviews overnight. The question was whether we could build something new from the ashes of what had burned down, or whether it was time to walk away from the wreckage completely. The next few days established a strange new rhythm in our house. David and I moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning unfamiliar choreography. He continued sleeping in the guest room without my having to ask. He started taking more interest in my work, asking questions about orders and designs, in a way that felt genuine if awkward. I found myself answering honestly, not downplaying my successes out of habit. Emma watched us navigate this new terrain with cautious optimism. I caught her observing our interactions at breakfast, noting the shifts in our dynamic. Sometimes she would join the conversation, offering insights about my jewelry with the enthusiasm of someone who had grown up watching pieces take shape under my hands. Your lake collection is going to be amazing for summer, she said one morning, as I showed David sketches for the Chicago boutique. Especially those wave-inspired earrings. Waves? David asked, genuinely curious. Emma leaned over, pointing to my sketch. See how the silver curves here? That's based on the wave patterns of Lake Michigan. Mom took all these photos last summer when we visited Aunt Kate, remember? She's been working on translating water movement into metal ever since. David studied the design with new eyes. That's really impressive, Rachel. I never realized how much thought goes into each piece. That's because you never asked, Emma said, not unkindly, but with the straightforward honesty that had become her trademark. To my surprise, David didn't bristle at her observation. You're right, he said simply. I should have paid more attention. On Friday afternoon, my sister Kate came over for coffee. We sat on the back patio, watching birds flit around the feeder I'd hung from the maple tree. "So," she said, stirring her latte, "it's been 3 days since the dinner heard round the world. How are things?" I laughed softly at her description. Strangely civil. Awkward, but not hostile. "And how are you feeling about all of it?" she asked, studying my face. I considered the question, wanting to give her a truthful answer rather than a convenient one. "Like I'm seeing my marriage clearly for the first time in years, and I'm not sure I like what I see." Kate nodded, unsurprised. "You know I'll support whatever you decide. Stay, go, burn the house down, and start over in Tahiti." Tempting. I smiled. "But I don't think arson is the answer." "Seriously, though," she continued, "what's your gut telling you? Can this be fixed?" I looked out at my garden, at the rose bushes I'd planted when we first moved in. They'd taken years to establish, to sink roots deep enough to withstand harsh winters and summer droughts. Marriage wasn't so different. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks maybe now that everything's out in the open, we could start fresh, build something more honest. But another part wonders if some betrayals cut too deep to heal from." "It wasn't a one-night stand or a hidden gambling debt," Kate pointed out. "He diminished you for years, made you feel small in your own life." "Yes," I agreed. "But I let him. I went along with the fiction because it was easier than fighting for recognition." Kate shook her head firmly. "Don't blame yourself for his failure to see you. That's not on you." I smiled at my fierce, protective sister. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time I watched my brilliant sister build a successful business while being treated like she was playing with craft beads," Kate replied dryly. We were still laughing when Emma burst through the back door, face flushed with excitement, waving her phone. "Mom, Mrs. Brennan just emailed about my econ project." "What did she say?" I asked, making room for her on the patio love seat. "She wants me to enter it in the state business competition. She says my analysis of gender biases in household economic perception is groundbreaking for a high school student." Emma could barely contain herself. "If I win state, I could qualify for nationals." "That's amazing." I hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you." "Way to go, genius," Kate added, high-fiving her niece. "Using your powers for good and academic glory." Emma beamed, then looked at me more seriously. "The thing is, I'd need to include more specific data for the competition entry. Nothing that identifies us by name, but more detailed than I planned for just the class presentation." I understood her concern immediately. "You're worried about exposing more of our family finances." She nodded. "I don't want to make things worse for you and Dad, but this could really help with college applications, and Mrs. Brennan thinks I have a real shot at winning." "Do it," I said without hesitation. "The truth is the truth. We don't need to hide it." "Should we ask Dad first?" Emma questioned, suddenly seeming younger than her 16 years. I considered this, appreciating her thoughtfulness even as I realized how quickly our family dynamic had shifted. A week ago, I might have instinctively said yes, might have prioritized David's comfort over Emma's opportunity. "I'll talk to him," I promised. "But regardless of how he feels, I want you to enter. This is your work, your insight, your achievement. You shouldn't have to diminish it for anyone else's comfort." The irony of my words wasn't lost on me. How many times had I diminished my own achievements for exactly that reason? Later that night, after Emma had gone to her room and Kate had headed home, I found David in his home office, working on his laptop. I knocked gently on the open door. "Got a minute?" I asked. He closed his computer immediately. "Of course." I sat in the chair across from his desk, suddenly nervous. "Emma got some exciting news today. Her economics teacher wants her to enter her project in the state business competition." The one about our finances? He clarified, his expression guarded. I nodded. She'd need to use more detailed data, though she'd keep everything anonymous. No names or identifying information. David was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly on his desk. And you're asking my permission? The question surprised me. I'm informing you, as a courtesy. Emma's going to enter regardless. This is a huge opportunity for her. He studied my face, something shifting in his expression. You're different this week. More decisive. Not different, I corrected gently. Just not hiding anymore. He nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place. I think I liked the fiction better, he admitted. The one where I was the provider, the decision maker, where you needed me. The raw honesty of his statement hung in the air between us. For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine compassion for him. Not because he deserved it, but because I could see the frightened man beneath the confident facade. I do need you, David, I said quietly. Just not in the way you thought. Not to support me or provide for me or make my decisions. I need you as a partner, as an equal. I always have. He met my gaze, his eyes revealing a vulnerability I'd rarely seen. I don't know if I know how to be that person. And there it was, the truth we'd been circling all week. The question wasn't whether I could forgive him for the past, but whether we had a future at all. I know, I said softly. That's what we need to figure out. A week after the anniversary dinner revelation, life had settled into an uneasy new pattern. David and I circled each other carefully in our shared spaces, polite but distant, like diplomatic representatives from countries with a complicated history. He continued sleeping in the guest room without discussion, and I found myself sleeping more soundly than I had in years. Emma's economics project had taken on new significance. What had started as a school assignment had become something more personal, more meaningful. I found her at the dining room table one evening, surrounded by printouts, her laptop open to a complex spreadsheet. "How's it going?" I asked, setting a mug of tea beside her. She looked up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm expanding the analysis for the state competition. Mrs. Brennan suggested I incorporate more data on gendered financial perception. You know, how society views men's and women's financial contributions differently." I sat down across from her, warming my hands on my own mug. "Sounds fascinating. Need any help?" "Actually, yes," she said, pushing a notebook toward me. "Could you look at these questions? I want to survey other families about who manages their finances and how financial contributions are perceived within the household." I skimmed the questions, impressed by their thoughtfulness and nuance. "These are excellent, Emma. Very well constructed." She beamed at the praise. "Thanks. I want to make sure I'm getting unbiased responses." "You know," I said carefully, "this whole situation has made me realize something important." "What's that?" "How much I've been complicit in diminishing my own worth." I traced the rim of my mug with my finger. "I stopped correcting your father years ago when he would take credit for our financial situation. I just accepted it as the price of peace." Emma studied me, her eyes serious beyond her years. "Why do you think you did that?" The question hit me harder than I expected. No one had asked me that before. Not David during our stilted conversations over the past week. Not Kate with her protective anger. Not even myself in my late-night reflections. "I think," I said slowly, "I was afraid." "Of Dad?" "No, not exactly. More afraid of disrupting the story we'd built. The one where your father was the provider, the successful one, and I was supplementary." I sighed. "It's hard to explain. But sometimes it's easier to accept a role you're given than to fight for the recognition you deserve, especially when fighting seems to threaten the whole structure of your life. Emma absorbed this, nodding slightly. That makes sense. But doesn't it wear you down after a while? Pretending to be less than you are? Yes, I admitted. It does. I just didn't realize how much until recently. Well, she said firmly, I'm glad you're not doing it anymore. You're kind of amazing, Mom. Everyone should know that, especially Dad. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, overcome with gratitude for this fierce, truth-telling daughter who refused to accept the convenient fictions adults often live by. The doorbell rang, interrupting our moment. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a glance at the clock showed it was nearly 8 p.m., late for casual visitors. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Patricia, David's mother, standing on our porch. She was impeccably dressed, as always, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression unreadable. Patricia, I said, masking my surprise. This is unexpected. I'm sure it is, she replied, her voice cool but not hostile. May I come in? I stepped aside, gesturing her into the foyer. David was working late, something that had become more frequent since our confrontation. Whether he was actually busy or simply avoiding home, I wasn't sure. Emma appeared in the hallway, her expression instantly guarded at the sight of her grandmother. Grandma, she said, her tone cautious. What are you doing here? Patricia's face softened slightly. Hello, Emma. I was hoping to speak with your mother. Emma looked at me questioningly. I nodded reassuringly. It's fine. Why don't you continue? Working on your project? I'll make some coffee for Grandma Patricia. In the kitchen, I went through the motions of preparing coffee, grateful for the familiar ritual to calm my nerves. Patricia and I had never been close. She had always viewed me with a mixture of skepticism and mild disapproval, as if I hadn't quite met the standard she'd expected for her only son. David doesn't know I'm here, she said, settling onto a stool at the island. I figured as much, I replied, measuring coffee grounds with practiced precision. She watched me work, her eyes taking in every movement. You've created a lovely home, she said unexpectedly. The compliment caught me off guard. In 15 years, Patricia had rarely commented positively on anything about me or my choices. Thank you, I said simply. As the coffee brewed, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, Patricia's gaze traveled to Emma's project materials still spread across the dining table, visible through the open doorway. That's quite an impressive analysis your daughter has. Put together, she observed. I turned to face her, leaning against the counter. Yes, it is. Emma has always had a gift for numbers and patterns. She gets that from you, I imagine, Patricia said. David was never particularly interested in economics. Another surprise. Patricia had never before acknowledged any positive traits Emma might have inherited from me rather than from her son. I poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to Patricia's the way I'd seen her prepare it at countless family gatherings. What brings you here tonight, Patricia? I asked as I set the cup in front of her. She curled her fingers around the mug, but didn't drink. What happened at your anniversary dinner? She began, her voice careful. It was illuminating. I waited, not helping her navigate this conversation. I've been thinking about it a great deal, she continued, about what Emma revealed, about your contribution to this family. I sipped my coffee, still silent. I believe I owe you an apology, Rachel. The words came out stiffly, as if she wasn't accustomed to speaking them. This time, I couldn't hide my surprise. An apology? She nodded, a small, precise motion. I've always prided myself on being observant, on understanding people and situations. But it seems I've been operating under a significant misconception about your role in this family's financial life. I set my coffee down, giving her my full attention. David has always spoken about being the provider, about supporting your artistic endeavors, Patricia continued. I never questioned it because it fit what I expected, what I was raised to believe about marriage and family roles. And now? I asked quietly. Now I see that I was wrong, that I allowed my preconceptions to blind me to the reality of your contribution. She met my eyes directly. After the dinner, I did my own research. I looked up your jewelry business online. I saw the boutiques that carry your pieces, the prices they command. I read the article about you in that design magazine last year. I blinked in surprise. I hadn't known she was aware of that feature. You've built something impressive, Rachel. Something substantial. And I failed to recognize that. She took a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts. More importantly, I think I contributed to David's dismissal of your work by reinforcing the idea that his role as the man was to be the primary provider. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with years of subtle and not-so-subtle judgments. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it. Patricia nodded, then asked the question I'd been dreading. What's going to happen with you and David? I sighed, running a finger around the rim of my mug. I don't know yet. We're talking, but there's a lot to work through. He's always been stubborn, she said unexpectedly. Gets that from his... Father never wanted to admit when he was wrong. I smiled despite myself. I've noticed. Patricia hesitated, then added, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I respect what you've built, your business, but also this family. Emma is a remarkable young woman, and that's in large part due to you. The words hit me with surprising force. All these years, I'd longed for validation from this woman who had seemed to find me perpetually lacking. Now it came at the very moment when my marriage to her son hung in the balance. I appreciate that, Patricia, truly. She finished her coffee and stood, smoothing her immaculate slacks. I should go. I just wanted to clear the air between us. As I walked her to the door, she paused in the foyer. One more thing, she said, turning to face me. David comes from a generation of men who were taught that their worth is tied to being providers. It's not an excuse for his behavior, but it might help explain it. I nodded, recognizing the olive branch she was extending. I understand that. The question is whether he can unlearn that conditioning and see me as a true partner. I hope so, she said simply, for both your sakes. After Patricia left, I found Emma hovering in the hallway, clearly having overheard at least part of our conversation. That was unexpected, she said wide-eyed. Very, I agreed. Did Grandma Patricia actually apologize to you? I smiled at her incredulous tone. She did. Wonders never cease. Emma shook her head in amazement. This project is having more impact than I ever imagined. Truth often does, I replied, putting my arm around her shoulders and guiding her back to the dining room. Now tell me more about these survey questions. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat in my studio with the lights low, working on a new design that had been taking shape in my mind all week. It was different from my usual aesthetic. Bolder, less concerned with conventional beauty, more focused on making a statement. I was so absorbed in the work that I didn't hear David come home until he appeared in the doorway of my studio, loosening his tie. "You're up late," he observed. I set down my tools, rolling my shoulders to release the tension from hunching over my workbench. Lost track of time. How was your day? He leaned against the doorframe, looking tired. Long. Challenging client situation. He paused, then added, My mother called me earlier. Did she? I kept my tone neutral. She said she came to see you tonight. I nodded. She did. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervous agitation I recognized from countless disagreements over the years. She said some things that surprised me. "What kind of things?" I asked, curious about how Patricia had presented her visit to her son. "She said she'd been wrong about you, about your contribution to our family." He looked uncomfortable, as if the words didn't fit easily in his mouth. "She said she'd done some research on your business and was impressed by what you've built." I couldn't help but smile slightly. That must have been difficult for her to admit. "It was," David agreed. "My mother doesn't acknowledge being wrong very often." "Like someone else I know," I said, the words slipping out before I could censor them. To my surprise, David didn't bristle at the observation. Instead, he nodded slowly. I deserved that. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with 15 years of accumulating misunderstandings and missed opportunities for honest communication. "Can I show you something?" I asked finally. David looked surprised by the invitation, but nodded. "Of course." I gestured him into the studio, toward my workbench where the new piece lay half completed. It was a pendant, a complex asymmetrical design in silver, with negative space creating a striking silhouette. "This is new," he observed. "Different from your usual style." "Yes," I agreed. "I'm calling it revelation. It's about the moment when you see something clearly for the first time, even though it's been there all along." David studied the piece, then met my eyes. "It's beautiful, powerful." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by his response. In all our years together, David had rarely engaged with my creative process on this level, rarely looked at my work with such thoughtful attention. "What inspired it?" he asked, and in that moment, I realized he truly wanted to know. "This past week," I said honestly. "Everything that's happened since the dinner. It's made me see things differently. My work, my worth, our relationship." He nodded slowly. "Me too." He hesitated, then added, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About what Emma showed us. About how I've treated your work all these years." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I think I convinced myself that your business was just a hobby because it was easier than admitting you didn't need me the way I thought you should," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "If you were successful on your own, what did you need me for?" The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. "David, partnership isn't about needing someone to survive. It's about choosing to build something together because it's better than what you could create alone." He absorbed this, brow furrowed in concentration. "I think I've been afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if you didn't need me financially, you wouldn't need me at all." "That's not how love works," I said gently. "At least it shouldn't be." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I met with Mark for lunch today," he said, referring to his brother. "He said something that really hit home. He said, if your sense of manhood depends on your wife being less successful than you, that's not strength, it's insecurity." I raised my eyebrows, surprised by this insight from Mark, who had always seemed to share many of David's traditional views on marriage. "He's right," David continued. "And the worst part is, I think I've known it all along. I just didn't want to face it." "Where does that leave us?" I asked, the question that had been hovering between us all week finally spoken aloud. David met my gaze directly. "I don't know. That depends on whether you think there's anything left to save. Whether you can forgive me for not seeing you all these years." I considered his words carefully. "Forgiveness isn't the issue, David. I can forgive you. The question is whether we can build something new from here, something honest, something equal. I can't go back to making myself small so you can feel big." "I wouldn't want you to," he said. And I believed him. "I just don't know if I know how to be the partner you deserve." His honesty was disarming. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to minimize what had happened or pressure me into a quick reconciliation. Just a man finally confronting the truth about himself and his marriage. "I think we need professional help," I said. "If we're going to try to rebuild, we can't do it alone." David nodded. "I agree. I found a couples therapist today, actually. Someone who specializes in relationships in transition." He pulled a business card from his pocket and set it on the workbench. "I made an appointment for next Tuesday evening, if you're willing." The gesture touched me, not just his willingness to try therapy, which he had resisted during previous rough patches in our marriage, but the fact that he had taken initiative rather than leaving the emotional labor to me, as he had so often in the past. "I'll be there," I said, not making any promises beyond that single commitment. Relief washed over his face. "Thank you." As he turned to leave the studio, he paused in the doorway. "Your work really is extraordinary, Rachel. I should have told you that a long time ago." After he left, I sat for a long time at my workbench, turning the therapy appointment card over in my hands. I didn't know if our marriage could be saved or even if it should be. But for the first time in years, I felt seen by my husband. Really seen. Not as an extension of him or a supporting character in his life story, but as a whole person with my own value, my own contributions, my own worth. The next morning, I woke early and slipped out of the house before anyone else was awake. I drove to Winton Woods, to the lakeside path where I often came to think when life felt overwhelming. The early spring air was crisp, mist rising from the water's surface as dawn broke over the trees. I walked slowly, watching geese glide across the lake, their reflections rippling in the still water. My mind was clearer here, away from the complicated emotions that filled our house, away from David's tentative attempts at change and Emma's watchful eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Jenny. "Brunch today? I miss your face." I smiled, typing back, "Yes, please. Noon at Maplewood?" I continued walking, letting the rhythm of my steps settle my thoughts. I had decisions to make about my marriage, about my future, about what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. But for the first time in a long time, those decisions felt like truly mine to make, not reactions to someone else's expectations or needs. By the time I returned home, Emma was in the kitchen making pancakes, still in her pajamas despite the late morning hour. David sat at the island reading something on his tablet, a mug of coffee at his elbow. The domesticity of the scene struck me, how normal it looked from the outside, how different it felt from within. "Morning," Emma called cheerfully. "Want blueberries in yours?" "Yes, please," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "I'm meeting Jenny for brunch at noon, but I can't resist your pancakes." David looked up from his tablet. "Mind if I head to the gym while you're at brunch? I can pick up groceries on the way back if we need anything." "That would be great," I said, the politeness between us still feeling strangely formal. "There's a list on the fridge." Emma flipped a pancake with expert precision, glancing between us with barely concealed interest. Since the night of the dinner, she had been watching our interactions carefully, gauging the temperature of our relationship with the astute perception that sometimes made me forget she was still a teenager. "I finalized my survey questions last night," she said, changing the subject. "Mrs. Brennan approved them this morning. I'm going to start collecting responses today." "That's great," David said, and I was surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. "Who are you surveying?" "Start with my classmates' families, then branch out to neighbors and community members," Emma explained, sliding pancakes onto plates. "I want a diverse sample. Different income levels, different family structures, different cultural backgrounds." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's smart. The broader your sample, the more valid your conclusions." Emma beamed at his approval. "Exactly. I'm hoping to get at least 100 responses before the state competition." As we ate breakfast together, I was struck by how this ordinary moment felt simultaneously familiar and utterly new. We were the same three people who had shared countless meals around this table, yet everything had changed. The air between us was clearer somehow, the pretenses stripped away by Emma's act of truth-telling. After breakfast, I went upstairs to get ready for brunch with Jenny. As I was finishing my makeup, David appeared in the bathroom doorway. "I've been thinking," he said, watching me apply mascara with practiced strokes, "about what you said last night, about building something new." I met his eyes in the mirror. "What about it?" "I want you to know I'm committed to trying, not just to fixing things, but to creating a different kind of partnership." He hesitated, then added, "But I also want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll respect it. If you determine that we can't move forward together, I won't make it harder for you." The words settled around me like a weight being lifted. No pressure, no emotional manipulation, no subtle guilt, just an acknowledgement of my agency in deciding our future. "Thank you for saying that," I said softly. "It means a lot." He nodded, then asked, "Would it be okay if I came to your next craft fair? The spring one at Eden Park? Emma mentioned it's coming up in a few weeks." The request surprised me. In all the years I'd been selling my jewelry at local art fairs, David had rarely shown interest in attending. He'd always had an excuse: work commitments, golf games, household projects that suddenly couldn't wait. "I'd like that," I said, feeling a small spark of hope ignite despite my caution. "It's on the 24th. "I'll clear my calendar," he promised, and something in his tone made me believe he actually would. These small moments of change were adding up, creating a picture of a man genuinely trying to see the world differently. Whether it was enough to save our marriage remained to be seen, but it was more than I had expected a week ago. At Maplewood Cafe, Jenny was already waiting at a table on the outdoor patio, sunglasses perched on her head, a mimosa in hand. She stood to hug me when I arrived, the embrace lingering with unspoken support. "You look good," she said as we sat down. "Better than I expected, honestly." I laughed. "Thanks, I think." "You know what I mean?" she said, waving to the server for another mimosa. "Last time I saw you was at that disaster of an anniversary dinner. I wasn't sure what state you'd be in." "I'm taking it day by day," I said. "Things are evolving." Jenny raised an eyebrow. "Evolving how? Are you guys splitting up?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "David wants to try counseling. He seems genuinely remorseful, genuinely committed to changing how he sees my work, my contribution." "And you believe him?" Jenny asked, her skepticism evident. I considered the question seriously. "I believe he wants to change. Whether he can is another question entirely. Patterns that have been in place for 15 years don't disappear overnight." Jenny nodded, taking a sip of her drink. "True. And what do you want?" The question hit me with unexpected force. What did I want? I'd been so focused on processing what had happened, on navigating the aftermath of Emma's revelation, that I hadn't fully asked myself what outcome I was hoping for. "I want to be seen," I said finally. "Really seen and valued. Not just for what I contribute financially, but for who I am. For the business I've built, the art I create, the mother I've been to Emma. I want a partner who celebrates my success, instead of feeling threatened by it." "And you think David can become that person?" Jenny's tone wasn't judgmental, just gently probing. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I think I owe it to 15 years of marriage, to Emma, to myself, to find out." Jenny reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm in your corner." And if that means helping you pick out fabulous furniture for a new place, I'm ready." I laughed, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thank you. For now, I'm taking it one step at a time. First step, couples therapy on Tuesday." As we ate our brunch, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: Jenny's new promotion, an upcoming art festival where I'd be showing my work, a movie we both wanted to see. It felt good to step away from the intensity of my home situation, to remember that life continued beyond the walls of my marriage. When I returned home that afternoon, the house was quiet. David was still out, and a note on the counter from Emma said she'd gone to the library to work on her project. I took advantage of the solitude to retreat to my studio, losing myself in the meditative process of creating. Hours slipped by as I worked on the Revelation pendant, adding texture to the surface with careful hammer strikes, polishing certain areas to a high shine while leaving others with a matte finish to create contrast. The piece was evolving, becoming more complex and nuanced than my initial design, much like my understanding of my marriage. As the afternoon light began to fade, I heard the front door open, followed by David's footsteps. He appeared in the studio doorway a few minutes later, grocery bags in hand. "Need any help putting those away?" I asked, setting down my tools. "I've got it," he said, "but I wanted to show you something first." He reached into one of the bags and pulled out a magazine, the latest issue of Artisan Jewelry Quarterly. "I was at the bookstore picking up that business book Mark recommended, and I saw this. Your name is on the cover." I stood up, surprised. "What?" He handed me the magazine, pointing to a line at the bottom. Inside, Rachel Mitchell's innovative approach to metalwork. "I had no idea," I said, flipping through to find the article. "They interviewed me months ago, but I didn't know when it would be published." There it was, a 4-page spread featuring my work, including photographs of several signature pieces and a lengthy interview about my creative process and business growth. "This is amazing, Rachel," David said, and the pride in his voice seemed genuine. "A national magazine recognizing your work. You should be celebrating." I looked up from the pages, meeting his gaze. "Thank you for bringing this home. For noticing it." He nodded, understanding the significance of the gesture. "I'm trying to see you, Rachel, really see you. I know I've got a lot of ground to make up, but I'm trying." As he turned to go put away the groceries, I called after him. "David?" He paused, looking back. "I'm trying too," I said softly. It wasn't a promise of forgiveness or reconciliation, not yet. But it was an acknowledgement that we were both doing the hard work of dismantling old patterns and creating space for something new to grow in their place. Whether that new growth would be strong enough to support a rebuilt marriage, or would instead provide the foundation for separate, healthier futures, remained to be seen. For now, it was enough to know that we were both seeing more clearly. Him, the full reality of my contribution and worth. Me, the possibility that people could change if they wanted to badly enough. And perhaps most importantly, we were both seeing Emma, watching and learning from every interaction, every step we took toward honesty and respect. Whatever came next, I was determined that she would carry forward a different legacy than the one I had accepted for so long. A legacy of standing in her truth, of never diminishing her light to make someone else comfortable, of knowing her worth was not dependent on anyone else's recognition of it. That, more than anything, felt like success. Tuesday evening arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation. David and I moved through our separate morning routines with the awareness that tonight's therapy session might reshape the landscape of our marriage. I spent the day in my studio, working on a commissioned piece for a gallery in Columbus, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of bending metal to my will, creating order from chaos. "Mom?" Emma's voice interrupted my concentration. I looked up to find her leaning against the door frame, backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd just returned from school, her hair slightly windblown, cheeks flushed from the spring breeze. "Hey, sweetie," I said, setting aside my tools. "How was school?" "Good. My economics teacher wants me to present my project at the district education conference next month." Pride shone in her eyes. "She says it has significant sociological implications beyond the financial analysis." I smiled, my heart swelling. "That's amazing, Emma. Congratulations." "Thanks." She shifted her weight, hesitating. "I know you and Dad have that therapy appointment tonight." "We do," I confirmed, wondering where this was going. "I just wanted to say—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Whatever happens, I'm okay. I just want you to know that you don't have to stay together for my sake. I'll be fine either way." The maturity in her voice nearly brought me to tears. My 16-year-old daughter trying to give me permission to prioritize my happiness over an idealized family structure. "Come here," I said, opening my arms. She dropped her backpack and stepped into my embrace. "Thank you for saying that. But this isn't about staying together for you or separating for me. It's about figuring out if there's something worth rebuilding here, something honest and equal." She nodded against my shoulder. "I know. I just didn't want you to worry about me in all this." I pulled back to look at her face. "I'll always worry about you. That's in the mom job description." I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I'm incredibly proud of the person you're becoming. Someone who values truth and stands up for what's right. However this turns out with your dad and me, that won't change." Emma smiled, then gestured toward my workbench. "What are you making?" I showed her the half-completed necklace, explaining my design concept and the technical challenges I was working through. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. This had always been our special connection. Art and creation, the language of making something from nothing. Whatever happened with David, this bond would remain unshaken. "I'm having dinner at Leah's house tonight," she said as she headed for the door. "Her mom said I could stay as late as needed, so don't worry about rushing home from therapy." I nodded, grateful for her thoughtfulness and for Leah's mother, who had offered this arrangement when I'd mentioned our first counseling session. "Text me when you're ready to come home. I can pick you up." At 5:30, David appeared in my studio doorway, dressed in a fresh button-down shirt and slacks. He'd clearly gone home to change after work, a small gesture that signaled the importance he was placing on this appointment. "Ready?" he asked, his voice carrying a nervous edge I rarely heard from him. "As I'll ever be," I replied, gathering my purse and keys. We drove separately to the therapist's office, a practical arrangement since David had come from work, but also a symbolic one. We were approaching this as two individuals trying to determine if we could still be a couple, not as a unit with a shared fate already decided. The therapist's office was in a converted Victorian house, with a discreet plaque by the door reading Dr. Elaine Winters, Marriage and Family Therapy. The waiting room was painted a soft sage green, with comfortable armchairs and soothing artwork on the walls. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, acutely aware of David beside me, the small space between us on the love seat feeling much larger than the physical inches it represented. When Dr. Winters opened her office door, I was surprised by how young. She seemed, perhaps early 40s, with warm brown skin and curly hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore simple black pants and a jewel-toned blouse, with delicate silver earrings that I couldn't help but admire from a professional perspective. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell?" she said, her voice warm but neutral. "Please come in." Her office continued the calming aesthetic of the waiting room. More plants, soft lighting, a comfortable couch positioned across from a single chair. Large windows overlooked a small garden, the last of the afternoon sunlight filtering through. Newly budded trees. "Before we begin," Dr. Winters said once we were seated, "I want to acknowledge that coming to therapy takes courage. No matter what happens in this room or in your relationship moving forward, the willingness to examine difficult truths is valuable in itself. I felt something in my chest loosen at her words. She wasn't promising to save our marriage or taking sides before hearing our story. She was simply acknowledging the difficulty and valor in showing up. "David," she said, turning to my husband, "in your initial phone call, you mentioned a significant event at your anniversary dinner that brought some long-standing issues to the surface. Would you be comfortable sharing that with me?" David cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes. We were celebrating our 15th anniversary with family and friends. I made a comment about being the primary financial provider for our family." He paused, his eyes darting briefly to me before returning to Dr. Winters. It was dismissive of Rachel's work. Our daughter Emma had been analyzing our family finances for a school project, and she corrected the record, so to speak. She showed everyone that Rachel actually contributes more financially than I do, and has for some time. Dr. Winters nodded, her expression thoughtful but not judgmental. "And how did that revelation affect you?" David ran a hand through his hair. "It was humiliating, honestly. Not just because everyone saw the truth, but because I realized I'd been telling myself a story that wasn't true, that I'd been diminishing Rachel's success to prop up my own ego." I blinked, surprised by his candor. In our conversations at home, he'd acknowledged being wrong, but hadn't articulated his motivations so clearly. "Rachel," Dr. Winters turned to me, "how did this moment affect you?" I took a deep breath, aware that my answer would set the tone for our work together. "It was like having a curtain torn down," I said slowly. For years, I'd been downplaying my professional success to avoid threatening David's sense of identity as the provider. I'd smile and nod when he would take credit for our financial stability, even though my business was growing and contributing more and more. When Emma revealed the truth, it forced me to confront how much I'd been complicit in my own diminishment. Dr. Winters nodded. "So there are really two issues here. One is David's mischaracterization of your financial contributions. The other is your choice to allow that mischaracterization to continue unchallenged. Does that feel accurate?" "Yes," I said, the simple admission carrying the weight of years of silence. "I'd like to understand more about how these patterns developed," she said. "David, can you think back to when you first began to see yourself as the primary provider, even as Rachel's business grew?" David was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think it was gradual," he finally said. "When we first got married, I was the primary breadwinner. Rachel was just starting her jewelry design, selling at local craft fairs on weekends. It was a side project, a creative outlet." He glanced at me. "But then it started to grow. She got into better shows. Boutiques started carrying her pieces. She added teaching and consulting." "And how did that growth make you feel?" Dr. Winters prompted. "Threatened," he admitted, the word hanging in the air between us. "My father worked while my mother stayed home. That was the model I grew up with. The man provides, the woman supports. When Rachel started bringing in significant income, it challenged my idea of what made me valuable in our marriage." I'd suspected this, of course, but hearing him articulate it so plainly was both validating and heartbreaking. "Rachel," Dr. Winters turned to me, "at what point did you begin to notice yourself downplaying your success to accommodate David's discomfort?" I thought back through the years, trying to pinpoint the moment when self-diminishment became my default strategy. "There was a show in Chicago about 7 years ago," I said, the memory suddenly clear. "A major department store buyer approached me about carrying my collection. It was a huge opportunity, national exposure, consistent orders. When I told David, his first response was, 'That's nice, but don't worry if it doesn't work out. We don't need the money.'" "And how did that make you feel?" Dr. Winters asked. "Dismissed," I said. the old hurt rising to the surface. Like my work only mattered as a hobby, not as a career, not as a contribution to our family. After that, I started sharing less about my successes. I'd mention new accounts or big orders, casually, downplaying their significance. Eventually, I just stopped trying to make him see. David looked stricken. "I don't even remember that Chicago show," he said quietly. "I can't believe I was so dismissive of something that important." "That's part of the problem," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "You didn't see my work as important, so you didn't remember these milestones that were huge for me." Meanwhile, I attended every office party, celebrated every promotion, listened to every work story, because your career was considered the real job. Dr. Winters let the moment sit, allowing the weight of this realization to settle between us. Then she said, "Let's talk about what each of you wants moving forward. David, you initiated this counseling. What do you hope to achieve here?" David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to repair what I've broken," he said. "I want to learn how to be a real partner to Rachel, to see her clearly and value her contributions, not just financially, but in all ways." He paused, then added, "And I want to be a better example for Emma. I don't want her to think that's how men should treat their partners." Dr. Winters nodded, then turned to me. "Rachel, what about you? What do you hope to gain from our work? Together?" The question hung in the air as I considered my answer carefully. "I need to know if what we have is salvageable," I said honestly. "These patterns run deep. They've shaped our relationship for 15 years. I need to know if David can truly see me as an equal, or if we'd eventually slide back into old dynamics." "That's a fair question," Dr. Winters acknowledged. "Change is difficult, especially when we're talking about deeply ingrained beliefs about gender roles and self-worth." She looked at both of us. "This work will require honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to examine uncomfortable truths. Are you both prepared for that?" We nodded, and for the remainder of the session, Dr. Winters guided us through an initial exploration of our communication patterns, our individual backgrounds, and the values we hope to center in our relationship. Moving forward. By the time we emerged from her office an hour later, dusk had fallen. The streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the sidewalk as we walked to our separate cars. "That was intense," David said, breaking the silence. "Yes," I agreed. "But helpful, I think." He nodded, then asked hesitantly, "Would you like to grab dinner? Talk about it a bit more?" I considered his invitation. Part of me wanted to retreat home, to process the session alone, but another part recognized the value in continuing this fragile new dialogue. "There's that new Thai place on Montgomery," I suggested. "We could try it." Relief washed over his face. "I'd like that." At the restaurant, we were seated in a quiet corner booth, the soft lighting and gentle background music creating a sense of intimacy. After ordering, we sat in awkward silence for a moment, both unsure how to transition from the structured environment of therapy to a casual dinner conversation. "I meant what I said," David finally offered, "about wanting to be a better example. For Emma." I nodded, taking a sip of water. "She notices everything, you know. She always has. Even when we thought she wasn't paying attention. She gets that from you," he said with a small smile. "That perceptiveness, that ability to see beneath the surface." The compliment caught me off guard. In the past, David had often attributed Emma's positive traits to his side of the family, another subtle way of diminishing my contribution. "Thank you," I said simply. Our food arrived, steaming plates of pad thai and green curry, the fragrant spices filling the air between us. As we ate, the conversation flowed more naturally, touching on Emma's upcoming presentation, a challenging client situation David was navigating at work, a new design concept I was exploring in my jewelry. "I've been thinking about what you said. In therapy, David said as we were finishing our meal. About attending your office parties and celebrating your promotions while you didn't get the same support for your business milestones. I nodded, waiting to see where he was going with this. I want to change that, he continued. I want to really understand your work, to be there for the important moments. He hesitated, then added, I'd like to come to your studio sometime, if that's okay. Not just popping in to ask a question, but really seeing how you create, learning about your process. The request touched me more deeply than I expected. My studio had always been my sanctuary, a space where I could be fully myself without worrying about making myself smaller or less intimidating. Inviting David into that space would be a risk, but also an opportunity for genuine connection. I'd like that, I said. Maybe this weekend? He nodded, a tentative smile lighting his face. Saturday morning? Saturday morning, I confirmed. As we drove home separately, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey we were undertaking. Not a return to what we had been. That wasn't possible after the truth had been so starkly revealed. But an expedition into unknown territory, mapping out what might be possible between two people willing to see each other clearly for perhaps the first time. When I arrived home, Emma was already there, curled up on the living room couch with a book. She looked up expectantly when I walked in. How did it go? She asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the concern in her voice. I sat beside her, kicking off my shoes. It was good. Challenging, but good. We're going to continue, with weekly sessions. Relief washed over her face. So you're not getting divorced right away? I laughed softly at her phrasing. No, not right away. We're going to try to work through some things first. I squeezed her hand. But remember what I said earlier. Whatever happens, you don't need to worry. We'll both always be your parents, and we both love you more than anything. She nodded, then asked, Did the therapist take sides? Like, did she tell Dad he was wrong to discount your work? It doesn't really work that way, I explained. She's not there to assign blame or pick sides. She's there to help us understand the patterns we've created and find healthier ways to relate to each other. Emma considered this. That makes sense. It's like in my economics project. I'm not saying which financial approach is morally superior. I'm just analyzing how different perceptions impact family dynamics. I smiled at her analytical mind. Exactly. Though I have to say, your presentation at dinner was a bit more direct than most therapy sessions. She grinned, not a bit repentant. Sometimes the data speaks for itself. The next morning I woke early, the house still quiet around me. I made coffee and carried it out to the back patio, watching the sunrise paint the sky in delicate pinks and golds. A text message buzzed on my phone, from David. Just wanted to say I'm looking forward to Saturday. What time should I come by the studio? The simple message carried a weight of meaning. In 15 years of marriage, David had never asked to spend time in my creative space, never shown interest in understanding the technical aspects of my work. His request represented something new, a genuine curiosity about a fundamental part of my identity that he had previously relegated to the margins of our shared life. 9:30? I suggested. I'll have coffee ready. Perfect, he replied immediately. I'll bring breakfast from that bakery you like. Another surprise. He'd remembered my favorite bakery, a small artisan shop that made exceptional pain au chocolat. These small gestures of attentiveness were accumulating, creating a portrait of a man trying, however imperfectly, to see me more fully. The rest of the week passed in a blur of activity. I had orders to fill, Emma had her project to refine, and David and I continued our careful dance of politeness and tentative connection. We ate dinner together most nights, the conversation more genuine than it had been in years, though still carrying an undercurrent of caution. David continued sleeping in the guest room, an arrangement we hadn't discussed, but both seemed to recognize as necessary for now. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. A perfect spring day. I'd spent an hour the previous evening tidying my studio, not to hide the reality of my work from David, but to ensure he could see the space as I did. Organized chaos, with each tool and material in its proper place. At precisely 9:30, I heard his footsteps on the garden path. He appeared in the doorway with a pink bakery box and a tentative smile. "Morning," he said, stepping inside. "I brought sustenance." "Perfect timing," I replied, pouring him a cup of coffee from the carafe I'd prepared. "I was just about to show you what I'm working on." As we ate our pastries, flaky, buttery pain au chocolat still warm from the bakery oven, I began explaining my current projects. The commissioned piece for the Columbus Gallery, the new collection for the Chicago boutique, the revelation pendant that had emerged from the aftermath of our anniversary dinner. David listened with an intensity I wasn't accustomed to from him, asking thoughtful questions about techniques I used, challenges I faced, decisions I made about materials and design. When I showed him my sketchbooks, filled with years of ideas both realized and abandoned, he studied them with genuine interest. "I had no idea how much planning goes into each piece," he admitted, turning the pages carefully. "I think I imagined. You just made things up as you went along." "Sometimes I do," I said, smiling. "But mostly it's a process of evolution. An idea starts here." I pointed to a rough sketch from years ago, and gradually becomes this. I showed him a finished necklace featuring interlocking geometric forms in silver and gold. "It's remarkable," he said, and for once I believed he meant it. Not as a perfunctory compliment, but as a genuine expression of admiration. I showed him how I use different tools: hammers for texturing, pliers for bending and shaping, torches for soldering. I demonstrated techniques I'd developed over years of experimentation, shortcuts I'd discovered, challenges I was still working to overcome. "Would you like to try?" I asked, offering him a small piece of copper and a texturing hammer. He looked surprised, but nodded, accepting the tools with careful hands. I guided him through creating a simple pattern on the metal, watching as he concentrated fully on the task, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's harder than it looks," he said, examining his uneven result. "Everything worthwhile is," I replied, and we both knew we weren't just talking about metalwork anymore. We spent 3 hours in the studio that morning, the time passing with surprising ease. As David prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me into this part of your world." "Thank you for wanting to see it," I replied. The moment hung between us, fragile and significant. Then he nodded and turned to go, leaving me alone in my studio with the lingering sense that something important had shifted between us. That evening, Emma approached me as I was preparing dinner. "So, Dad came to your studio today?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "He did," I confirmed, continuing to chop vegetables for a stir-fry. "He wanted to learn more about my work process." "And how was that?" Her tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear the hope beneath it. I considered my answer, wanting to be honest without giving her false expectations. "It was good. Different. He asked real questions and listened to the answers." Emma nodded, absorbing this. "He asked me about my economics project yesterday," she offered. "Like actual specific questions about my methodology and findings, not just the polite, 'How's your project going?' kind of thing." "That's good," I said, feeling a cautious optimism. These were small steps, but they represented a significant departure from David's previous patterns of engagement with both of us. "Mom," Emma said hesitantly, "do you think you guys are going to be okay?" I set down my knife and turned to face her fully. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "We're both trying, but there's a lot of water under the bridge, a lot of patterns to break. It's too soon to tell." She nodded, accepting my answer without pushing for more certainty than I could provide. "I just want you to be happy," she said. Both of you. I know, sweetie, I said, pulling her into a quick hug. That's what we want for you, too. The following Tuesday found us back in Dr. Winter's office, diving deeper into the patterns that had shaped our marriage. This session focused on our families of origin, how the models of partnership we'd witnessed growing up had influenced our expectations and behaviors. My father was very traditional, David explained. He worked, Mom stayed home. He made the financial decisions, she managed the household. Their roles were clearly defined. And how did that affect your expectations for your own marriage? Dr. Winters asked. David considered this. I think I assumed I would naturally take on my father's role, the provider, the decision maker. Even when Rachel's business grew, I kept trying to fit our relationship into that familiar pattern. Rachel, Dr. Winters turned to me. What about your family? My parents had a more equal partnership, I said. They both worked. They made decisions together. My mother had her own career as a teacher, and my father was always supportive of that. But I hesitated, recognizing a pattern I hadn't fully acknowledged before. My mother still did most of the emotional labor. She was the one who remembered birthdays, planned holidays, smoothed over conflicts. My father was supportive, but somewhat passive. Dr. Winters nodded. So you had a model of a working mother whose career was respected, but who still shouldered most of the invisible work of maintaining family relationships. Yes, I said, the realization clarifying something for me. And I think I recreated that dynamic with David. I accepted his dismissal of my work because I was focused on maintaining harmony, on doing the emotional labor of protecting his ego. The session continued in this vein, each of us excavating the unconscious expectations we'd brought into our marriage. By the end, I felt both drained and curiously lighter, as if naming these patterns had begun the process of dismantling them. As we were leaving, Dr. Winters suggested an exercise for the coming week. Each of us would write a letter to the other, articulating what we valued about them beyond their practical contributions to our family. We wouldn't share these letters, yet they were preparation for our next session. But the assignment left me contemplating what I truly valued about David, separate from his role as provider or father. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat at my desk with a blank journal, page before me. What I value about David, I wrote at the top, then paused, pen hovering. The immediate answers felt too easy, too superficial. His stability, his reliability, his devotion to Emma. I wanted to dig deeper, to identify the essential qualities that had drawn me to him initially and kept me invested despite the difficulties. After some reflection, I began to write. I value your integrity, your unwavering commitment to doing what you believe is right, even when it's difficult. I value your capacity for growth, your willingness to examine your assumptions and change when presented with new information. I value your steadiness, the quiet strength that has provided a foundation for our family through good times and bad. I value your intelligence, the thoughtful way you analyze problems and consider solutions from multiple angles. I value your love for Emma, the way you've always respected her independence while providing guidance and support. I value your resilience, your ability to face challenges without being defeated by them. As the list grew, I found myself reconnecting with aspects of David I had lost sight of amid the strain of our unbalanced dynamic. These qualities hadn't disappeared. They had simply been overshadowed by the patterns that had come to define our relationship. The exercise didn't erase the hurt or magically fix our problems, but it did remind me why I had once believed this man could be my partner in building a life. Whether those qualities would be enough to create a new, more equal relationship remained to be seen, but acknowledging them felt like an important step in our journey toward clarity. The following days brought small but significant shifts in our interactions. David began asking about my work regularly, not as a perfunctory check-in, but with genuine interest in the details. He attended Emma's presentation of her economics project at school, visibly proud as she confidently explained her findings about gender biases in financial perception. He suggested we alternate cooking dinner rather than defaulting to me as the meal preparer, a role I had unconsciously assumed years ago. These changes weren't dramatic declarations of transformation, but quiet adjustments to long-standing patterns. They required conscious effort on both our parts, me learning to assert my value without apology, him learning to recognize and appreciate my contributions without feeling diminished. By our third therapy session, something had shifted between us. The awkward formality that had characterized our early interactions after the anniversary dinner had evolved into a more genuine connection, still tentative, but no longer strained by unspoken resentments. Dr. Winters noticed the change immediately. "You two seem more at ease with each other today," she observed as we settled into our usual seats. David and I exchanged glances, a small smile passing between us. "We've been trying," he acknowledged. "Really trying, not just going through the motions." "We exchanged our letters last night," I added. Even though they were meant for today's session, it felt right to share them. Dr. Winters nodded approvingly. "And how was that experience for each of you?" "Illuminating," David said. "Rachel saw things in me that I'd forgotten were there. Qualities that got buried under years of, performance, I guess. Trying to be the person I thought I was supposed to be rather than just being myself." "I felt the same way," I admitted. David's letter reminded me of parts of myself that I've neglected. My sense of adventure, my creativity beyond my work, my capacity for joy. It was like being seen fully for the first time in years. The session that followed was different from our previous ones, less focused on past hurts, more oriented toward possibilities for the future. We talked about practical changes we could make to create a more equal partnership, about how to support each other's growth rather than falling back into comfortable but limiting roles. As we drove home separately, I found myself thinking about the first time I met David at a friend's gallery opening 16 years ago. I'd been immediately drawn to his quiet confidence, his thoughtful questions about the artwork, his genuine laugh. When he'd asked for my number at the end of the evening, I'd felt that rare combination of excitement and ease that signals something promising on the horizon. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, a soft knock sounded on my bedroom door. I opened it to find David standing there, looking uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped between his knees. "I've been thinking a lot about what Dr. Winters said today," he began, "about creating a new relationship rather than trying to fix the old one." "Me too," I said, sitting beside him but maintaining a small distance between us. "I want you to know that I'm committed to that," he said, meeting my eyes directly, "to building something new with you, something equal and honest. But I also understand if that's not what you want anymore." The vulnerability in his voice touched me deeply. This was the David I had fallen in love with. Direct, sincere, willing to risk rejection for the sake of truth. "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "I see the changes you're making. I appreciate them. But this is still so new, and the patterns we fell into were so deep." He nodded, accepting my uncertainty without pushing for more commitment than I could offer. "I understand. I just wanted you to know where I stand." As he rose to leave, I caught his hand. "David?" He turned back, a question in his eyes. "Thank you," I said simply. "For trying, for seeing me." He squeezed my hand gently. "I should have seen you all along. I'm sorry it took Emma's spreadsheets to open my eyes." After he left, I sat for a long time on the edge of my bed, contemplating the strange journey we were on. We weren't back where we started. That wouldn't be possible or even desirable after everything that had happened. We weren't moving forward with certainty either, the future still too unclear to navigate with confidence. We were somewhere in between, in a transitional space where old patterns were being dismantled and new possibilities were taking tentative shape. Whether those possibilities would include a renewed marriage or a respectful, caring divorce remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own life, no longer diminishing myself to maintain a comfortable fiction. As I finally laid down to sleep, I thought of Emma, whose courage had catalyzed this transformation. She had refused to accept the convenient lies adults tell themselves to avoid difficult truths. In doing so, she had given both David and me an unexpected gift, the opportunity to see ourselves and each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. Whatever happened next, that gift of truth would remain, shaping not just our futures, but Emma's. Understanding of what she deserved in her own relationships, that alone made all the discomfort, all the hard conversations, all the painful realizations worthwhile. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Not because all our problems were solved or because I knew exactly what lay ahead, but because I was finally standing fully in my truth. Whether David and I found our way back to each other or forged separate paths forward, I would never again make myself smaller to protect someone else's ego. I would never again accept being unseen. That certainty, that commitment to my own worth, was perhaps the most valuable contribution Emma's spreadsheets had revealed. Not just the numbers that proved my financial value, but the courage to claim my personal value without apology or diminishment. In that quiet moment, regardless of what the future held for my marriage, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again contribute less than I was capable of giving, to my family, to my work, or to myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.